Department of Wildlife Conservation, Outdoor Oklahoma.
Hello and welcome to Outdoor Oklahoma. I'm Todd Craighead, and today I'm once again out front of the Sam Noble Oklahoma Museum of Natural History down here in Norman. You know, this museum is probably most noted for the fantastic exhibits that you'll find in here that are open to the public. And if you haven't been down here, you've got to get down here and see it for yourself. But the museum has a lot of other interesting things going on the inside too, like research on Oklahoma's natural history. Today I'm going to be checking it out for myself. Well, there are certainly some exciting exhibits here, but that's not the only interesting work being done here at the museum. You know, a lot of exciting research is being done here at the Sam Noble Oklahoma Museum of Natural History concerning dinosaurs, for instance, things of our past that are no longer around anymore, and a skeleton's the only evidence we have of them. So today we're going to be following along with two researchers that are based right here out of the museum, Dr. Caldwell and Dr. Vitt. We're going to follow them out to Pack Saddle Wildlife Management Area as they collect reptiles and amphibians and then bring them back here to the museum for them to be cataloged.
We're out at the Pack Saddle Wildlife Management Area today, and we're checking up with a reptile and amphibian survey that's going on. And I'm visiting at this moment with Dr. Lori Vitt. Dr. Vitt, you're a professor at the University of Oklahoma, is that correct?
Right, I'm curator of reptiles.
Okay, and you're working on surveying the reptiles and amphibians found on this wildlife management area.
Yeah, and my wife is curator of amphibians, and she's also a professor in zoology.
Well,
so we have similar positions.
Just as we've got a partnership going on with that setup, there's also the partnership between the Wildlife Department and the University of Oklahoma to do a survey of our reptiles and amphibians out at this area. Why is this work important?
What we're really after, at least at the basic level, is discovering what all of the species are that occur in this particular area. And it's actually fairly difficult with reptiles and amphibians because many of the species are not active during the day, or they're extremely cryptically colored so that you can walk around and you don't see them. If you think about horned lizards, for example, when you walk around and you'll see a horned lizard after it moves. You usually don't see it before it moves. A lot of the snakes only come out a couple hours a week. Some things are out only after rain, so it's really difficult to find the animals. And so we use a combination of techniques to find the animals, capture them. We photograph them when we capture them. And in this particular area, we're using a combination of plastic drift fences with funnel traps on the ends that the animals hit the drift fence, they walk down the fence, they go in the trap, and then we check the trap. So we get a lot of stuff that we would never see in the daytime walking around. And then we go around, we search habitats, we turn rocks over, we turn logs over, and then at night we go into ponds with headlights. We wander around in habitats with headlights and search for animals that are active at night. And we find a lot of stuff at night. So it's really a combination of things. We also drive roads at night. A lot of things come out on the roads. They'll sit on the road for a while, or they'll cross the road, and with a car we can actually see them crossing and getting them.
Now it takes a certain sort of dedication to want to come out here and turn under rocks and take a look at the creepy crawly things.
He's just playing dead here, but you notice this turned up nose. That's the hognose snake. This is the eastern hognose snake. We'll take this one and go on down the road.
Yeah,
see
we'll
what
get
else
some
we can
photographs of them later.
Yeah, this is great.
I know that it took a couple days to set up all of your fences and to get these traps ready. What's involved with that process?
First of all, buying the materials. Each one of the arrays, this particular thing is called an array, and it has 3 lines of plastic fence, and each line is about 8 meters long, and then it has a total of 6 funnel traps, and then we come out with stakes, plastic, and the funnel traps, and we come out and in a matter of about 2 days we'll put in 40 or 50 of these arrays. And so in this particular spot we have 20 arrays, and then in another canyon we have 20 more arrays, and then we check them every day. We have to make sure that we check them frequently enough that animals don't die in the traps. You'll notice on the funnel traps we have pieces of burlap taped to the traps, and that's to keep the sun from hitting the animals, causing them to desiccate and die or to overheat. So we do a lot of things to make sure that the animals actually survive being captured and monitored.
Now this sort of work, it takes some funding. You just named a bunch of things you've got to buy to do this. You've got your travel time to get out here and the staff that's helping you work on this. We've got a unique partnership going on to make this possible. Will you explain how that works?
Well, what we did to get this project started is, first of all, we spent several years talking with various people in ODWC about doing herp surveys on the wildlife management areas. And we've been involved in these kinds of surveys in South America and in Montana and in some other places for a number of years. So we have a history of doing this sort of thing. And so we put together a proposal for ODWC and requested funding to cover most of our travel, some of our salaries, and part of the program includes a university match. And so the university is required to match at least 25% in order to get the funding going, and we were able to match close to 50%.
Well, and what you're talking about, the reason that the Wildlife Department even had money to match is a new program called State Wildlife Grants.
Right, exactly.
And as you mentioned earlier, we simply just don't know how many and which species of lizards and snakes and frogs we've got out here on most of our wildlife management areas. So because of state wildlife grants, the nation's core program for keeping species from becoming endangered, we were able to give some funding to the University of Oklahoma, who can match that with us, and making this information available to not only the state, but also the nation, and important information, correct?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Well, Dr. Vitt, you've got these traps set up all over the area, and I see we're standing in front of one right now, so let's go take a look at it.
Sounds good. Look, we've got a snake in this trap.
Let's go check it out.
Yeah. Notice this snake is sticking his tongue out. Snakes sense things with their tongues. They pick up particles from surfaces and they bring those particles into their mouth. They have an organ in the roof of their mouth. Those particles are sort of scored with that organ and signals transmitted to the brain, and they can tell what it is that they're sensing. For example, he can tell that this is my finger and not a lizard, so he won't try to eat my finger, but he might try to bite my finger because he's a little bit defensive at the moment. And the double tip on snake tongues, a lot of people think those are poisonous. They're not poisonous at all, they're just tips, and they can use those tips to actually tell the direction of a chemical signal. And so they're sampling in 2 places. They can tell basically the side of a signal, so and the strength of the chemical signal. And so by comparing the strength on 2 different sides, they can tell where that chemical signal is going. And they can follow a trail. So snakes can follow trails of other snakes. They can follow trails of the things that they eat, and so on.
What's the bite feel like?
They have teeth. They have little tiny teeth. They can draw blood. In fact, I have a little blood on my finger from the snake biting me. They don't hurt much. Their saliva actually numbs the area just a little bit so you don't feel it. And often the saliva acts as an anticoagulant, so it'll bleed a little bit more than you might expect from a pinprick. But the bites of most non-venomous snakes really don't hurt much at all. Big water snakes can hurt because they have bigger teeth.
Well, we left Dr. Vitt over checking out all the snake traps, and I'm down here by the pond with Dr. Jana Lee Caldwell because Jana's specialty is amphibians. And we're going to find out what we need to do to find the amphibians that live on this wildlife management area. What's involved with that process?
Okay, well, there are a lot of different ways that we find amphibians. We actually do find some in the drift fences, and usually that occurs when there's a heavy rain, because there are lots of amphibians that occur here in western Oklahoma, like Spadefoot toads, narrowmouth toads, that stay underground almost all the time until it rains. And then it's just an explosion. You just wouldn't believe how many of these frogs and toads are around here until it actually rains.
And that makes it really important to come back at different times of the season and multiple times for this work.
That's right. Actually, it's really better to look for amphibians in the early spring and toward the end of spring also, when the summer thunderstorms start to happen, because that's when amphibians are really active and when they're starting to breed, and that's when they're easiest to find.
Well, we know that some of what you're doing out here is to find out which amphibians are living out here, what frogs are here.
That's right.
Now, why is that important to understand that?
Well, that's important because there are lots of places in Oklahoma that we really don't know anything about. I mean, it would sound like that Oklahoma is very well known and people have worked here a lot, and that's true. There are some places that have been very well worked, but there are other places where no one has really come and looked for amphibians. And Ellis County and this particular area is one of those. Already we've only been working here, well, less than 2 or 3 weeks so far, and we've already found several new county records for amphibians.
Well, Dr. Caldwell, you and Dr. Vitt are leads on this state wildlife grant project to find out what amphibians and reptiles are living here on this WMA.
That's right.
It's a huge area. How can two people do this?
Oh, we don't do it by ourselves by any means. We have excellent help. On this particular project, one of the OU zoology graduate students, Don Shepard, is working with us. And Don has worked on many projects, and he's had a great deal of experience with both amphibians and reptiles. So he's excellent help. And we're also very fortunate this particular trip to have a high school student that we met 2 years ago at one of the bio blitzes in Oklahoma, and Buddy Brown is working with us. And Buddy, we met him 2 years ago, and he's a high school student. He'll be a senior next year in Morris, Oklahoma, in eastern Oklahoma. And he's been working on snakes almost as long as we have, and he's not even that old.
And from what I understand, Buddy has a real good way of capturing these things.
He's excellent. He loves snakes and he loves frogs, and so we're really fortunate to have him. So we couldn't do these projects without really excellent help.
When you do get a species, what do you do with it?
Well, we do several things. For every animal that we get, we take various kinds of data, like whether it's a male or female. If it's a female, is it gravid? We take, most of these animals that we collect, we will release back exactly where we found them. But we do take a few specimens for the Museum of Natural History and to keep in our collection. There are lots of things that you can find out about amphibians from preserved specimens that you could never find out from a live specimen. In order to study their taxonomy, or what's related to what, there are lots of characters like tiny little tubercles on the toes and things like that that you have to look at under a microscope, or you could never see it otherwise. So we also take a DNA sample on those animals, and the samples are maintained, and any scientists anywhere in the world can use those DNA samples.
At any time, right?
At any time.
It'll be good for hundreds of years to come, as long as the museum is there.
Well, we hope so. We don't know exactly how long the DNA samples will last, but I think they should last for a very long time.
And with all that information, does that just help us make sure that these wildlife species are around for generations to come?
Yes, that's very important, and it also helps us to figure out what is a species.
And when you understand more, you know what habitats they live in and how to best conserve and just make other decisions that are good for the whole Earth as well.
That's exactly right.
Well, I got so much more to see, but it's almost time for me to meet up with Dr. Caldwell and Dr. Vitt. So as soon as I finish looking at the Oklahoma exhibit, I'm going to head downstairs. In the meantime, you check out this week's Outdoor News Report. Well, I'm excited to be a part of this process. Now we're out of the field and actually in your laboratory. This is what you call the prep lab, right?
That's right.
Okay, now tell me a little bit about this process and the step here before the specimen actually makes it to its final resting
The
place.
collection room.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what we do is we bring the specimens in the lab here, and we've got some long-nosed snakes here. And you see that it has a field tag on it. So this is the tag that we put on in the field. But when it comes in this laboratory, we put an OM&H tag, an Oklahoma Museum of Natural History tag on it.
Okay.
So then it will be given a unique museum number on that tag. Then after that, we'll catalog the specimens into a database, and then we'll be able to search that and know all the information.
Sure. So this field number references that date that you were at Pack Saddle.
That's right.
And then you can then look at your field notes and determine all the other aspects of that trip.
That's right. And we'll know exactly where the specimens were collected, and then we'll have all kinds of information about the specimens.
Sure. So not only just knowing the species, but knowing as much information about the day and exact location that it was collected is very vital information.
That's right. And we'll have field notes from that date too, and that will give us a lot of information about the ecology of the species, and we'll be able to reference those from the number on the specimens.
So after you've done your part here in the prep lab and you've actually put a museum tag on it and inventoried all the information concerning this species, where does it eventually end up?
Okay.
Because you can't have near enough space in this room.
No, we don't. We will put the specimens back in the jar, and we have these tags. So this gives more locality information. This goes in the jar with the specimen, and then the jar is placed over in our collection room. And so we have the collection across the hall, and so maybe you'd like to go over there and see that.
I would. Okay. Thanks. We're now back at your home base. This is kind of really like your turf where you end up bringing all the specimens once they're all collected. Tell me a little bit about this stage of the process.
Well, we once materials come out of our prep lab, then they're brought in here, they're stored in 70% alcohol, they're stored in a very organized fashion, and then these specimens are used for future research in lots and lots of different areas. And so the collection itself is a valuable tool for future generations, for other researchers throughout the world. Lots of these animals are shipped out, they're loaned to people for different kinds of research. And
so you don't have just you have more than one of each specimen, I'm sure, right? You've got several. And they're checked out like a library book.
Essentially, yeah. It's a little more complex than that, but that's really the way it works. It's pretty much like a library of animals and for museums that have plants of the world. And people use these really for hundreds of years. They're really valuable specimens.
Well, it's really exciting to know that we've got this right here in Oklahoma.
Right.
And that Oklahoma is playing a very critical role in the research and the understanding of these animals throughout the world.
Right. Yeah, some of the other things we do, this is the collection part, but we write scientific papers, we write books, we use these things in films, we supply photographs to people all around the world. It's really a lot of different things that are associated with the collections that you see here. This collection contains about 50,000 specimens. Most are from Oklahoma, and we have representation for the whole state here, and we have collections that were made 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, 100 years ago. So we have materials that span time and space.
That is fantastic. This is really well organized, and you mentioned that as well.
Right.
Do you organize it by the taxonomy of it, or is it by region, or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. It's taxonomy first. So that we can find species, and then within each taxonomic group, it's by locality. And so we could easily walk to all of the garter snakes, for example, of Oklahoma in the collection, and then they're organized by county. So we can find those that represent various counties, and And
You
so
bet.
it's a historical record of what occurred virtually everywhere in the state.
You know, this is really what the purpose of that grant is to really discover what we don't know.
Right.
And what we're finding out we don't know is a lot of information.
Right, and it also makes the wildlife management areas really good resources for nature lovers in the state, because once these kinds of surveys are completed, we'll know what's there, and so we can sort of key people into the things that they might be able to see when they're in the area.
Well, you know, it's one thing to talk about it in the field and to see the field work part of your research, but it's certainly another very impressive thing to get to come here, and I appreciate you letting me. Can I look around a little bit, maybe?
Of course, help yourself, and you know, we'll show you anything you want to see in here. And this is open to anybody that's really interested.
Great. So the next time you're visiting here at the Sam Noble, Oklahoma Museum of Natural History, realize there's a whole lot more going on between these walls than just dinosaurs. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you somewhere new next time in Outdoor Oklahoma.